I mean, I wanted to make um, just a few points tonight about the election, because I think it's a remarkable election, at least in a negative sense, in the sense that, I've never known an election where people are so miserable about the election, where there's so like little enthusiasm for it, where all the things that you hear from your own experience, but also that you hear from what you see on the television and so on, is that people are saying that they don't know who to vote for, that they don't feel any enthusiasm for any of the parties. And indeed, by coincidence, today there's the publication of the latest British Social Attitudes Survey, which was done at the end of last year, but obviously relates very much to this, where public trust in the government has fallen to a record low, and 45% of people questioned there said they almost never trust government to put national interest before party interests. 52% said they were dissatisfied with the NHS, with a huge increase even on 2019. So, and you go through all the different things that people are concerned about, you find the same thing. So what you've got, it strikes me, is that we have an election whose outcome probably isn't in a great deal of doubt, that it's hard to see how Starmer won't win a majority because Labour is so ahead in the polls. But it could end up being a majority, and perhaps a very big majority, but on a very low proportion of the vote. In other words, it could be a lower proportion of the vote than Jeremy Corbyn got in 2017 or even in 2019. And certainly it will, I think you can fairly confidently say that the number of people voting for Starmer as a proportion of the vote will be lower. At the same time, because of the disgust with the Tories, it is likely that Labour will be able to win quite comfortably. And if you look at the election campaign, I mean, when you say that people are fed up with all the parties and so on, it's no wonder when you look at the election campaign. I mean, we have record problems in Britain in terms of, and again, this is highlighted all the time, that nothing works, that there's going to be, people want nationalisation. There's going to be very little nationalisation from a Labour government. They're talking about possibly the railways, but not much else apart from that. People want more money on the health service, but Wes Streeting is talking about more and more money going to private companies that work in the health service, and obviously cream their profits out from it. And you can go through this with every area. So I think we're talking about a low turnout election, but also an election whose main themes so far have been extremely right wing. There's not the money to spend on alleviating poverty. There's not the money to lift the two-child benefit cap. There's not the money to do anything apart from when it comes to defence spending, where everybody talks about more money for defence, more militarism, we've got more racist scapegoating of migrants. This is the whole way the campaign is. And of course, since Nigel Farage joined it just over a week ago, you've got it going even more in that direction. Now, it's absolutely clear that after 14 years, millions of working class people in this country are absolutely sick of the Tories, and that actually the majority of working class people who are sick of the Tories will vote Labour in the next election. But it's also the case that there have been some very big changes over the last few months. The most notable is the huge movement around Gaza, which we're still seeing, the huge demonstrations, all the boycott activities, all the different things that have been going on. And that, again, is reflected in public opinion, where the vast majority of people are supportive of a ceasefire and want Israel to stop what it's doing. Now, that's led to a real splintering. It's led to a real crisis for both main political parties, but particularly for Labour, which relies, something like 80% of Muslims in the last election voted Labour, and I think it's down to 60 or so percent that will vote for them this time of the Muslim community. They rely very heavily on Muslim votes. They take for granted left-wing non-Muslim votes as well. So they rely heavily on the people that oppose them very, very much over Gaza. So Gaza is a big issue in this election. And obviously, one of the things that we're saying, and one of the main things we're saying, is vote left. In other words, vote for candidates who support the Palestinians, vote for, but not just Gaza. You know, this has to be a Gaza plus election. You can't not talk about the appalling state of public services. You can't not talk about the way that immigrants are treated and so on and so forth. So we've also had an unprecedented number of independent candidates standing, many of whom are, I mean, not all, by the way. I mean, if you look at some of the independent candidates who are standing, there seems to me there's not a great deal to recommend them, apart from they want to see themselves as an MP. But there are also a considerable number of independent candidates. Michael himself, obviously, Andrew Feinstein in Holborn and St Pancras, Leanne Mohammed in Ilford North, and then you've got ex-MPs like Jeremy Corbyn, obviously, in Islington North, who was refused to be able to stand for Labour, and Claudia Webb in Leicester. So, you know, you've got a whole range of very good independent candidates that we should vote for and we should campaign for. And I think what's very, very important about those, obviously we'd like some of those to win. I think that's extremely difficult for people to get a majority under the system of first past the post. And I think that what we're really looking at, and I think it's very important we see it like this, that it's not just about what happens in the election campaign, but it's also about what happens on July the 5th and afterwards. Because if we're assuming there is going to be a big Labour majority, then we also have to assume that, firstly, that there'll be very little for working class people coming out of that Labour government. There will be a great deal of disappointment very, very early on. I don't think, I mean, Starmer will get a bit of a breathing space, I presume, but it will be weeks and months rather than years. It won't be that everyone will be happy with him for the first 2 or 3 years and then get fed up. It will be, maybe people will give him the benefit of the doubt for a few weeks, maybe a few months, but that will very, very quickly disappear. And what's important is that we have a whole number of candidates. Hopefully they can win. Hopefully Jeremy will win. Hopefully maybe a few other people. I mean, Faisal Shaheen in Chingford maybe has a chance of winning and so on. But really the key thing is, what are we building for what comes afterwards? And therefore, to get a good vote, even if it doesn't succeed in overturning the Labour MP in Birmingham or in Preston or anywhere else, but to get a good vote of thousands of people actually lays the basis for building socialist organisation and mass organisation in the months and years after the election. So that, to me, is a very, very important thing. But also, we should recognise that even if we do get people elected, that's only a small part of what we should be considering, whether it's about Gaza, whether it's about the housing crisis, whether it's about the NHS, because we know, firstly, that the whole system of Parliament, and anybody who's been to the Westminster Parliament will know this, that it's actually an incredibly rotten system. It's one which is based on privilege and wealth. It's one which is based on lobbying by very powerful interests, and that most MPs succumb very, very quickly to that kind of pressure. But more importantly, it's not just the role of individuals, because there are some decent, good socialists who don't succumb to that kind of pressure. But then it's a question of, what can MPs actually do? And this is where you see the weakness of Parliament, the weakness, the more people have got the vote in Parliament, the less central it has been to British capitalism, and the more that the real decisions that affect our lives are made outside of Parliament, and very often outside of government as well. So it's a question then of how we look at what are the key questions. How do we fight over the Gaza movement to try to defeat Western imperialism over what they're doing there? How do we fight to ensure that everybody has a home? How do we fight for a decent, when we talk about the New Deal for workers, absolutely appalling abandonment of nearly everything by Starmer in his manifesto. How do we fight for a decent wage for everybody, for secure jobs, for jobs which are green jobs, all those kind of questions? How do we fight on all of those kind of things? And the truth is that every big fight has taken place outside of Parliament. I think it's very important we understand that. So, when you look at the Gaza movement, there would not be these independent MPs. We would not have had, I guarantee you, we would not have had Keir Starmer saying he wants a Palestine state, however feeble that demand might be. None of this would have happened without the demonstrations over Gaza. Women would not have got the vote without the suffragette movement and the suffragists. It simply would not have happened. Trade unionists would not have got the vote without a whole series of campaigns, and wouldn't have won any of their demands without a whole series of campaigns and strikes and organisation to do so. So I think we have to say that real change, elections are important, and they're very important to show how people feel about things. And it's very, very important we have socialists like Michael who are standing in elections, but on their own, they change very little. And they're usually a reflection, the change that does come is usually a reflection of past struggle rather than an accurate barometer of what they want to do. So let's vote left, let's campaign for Michael, let's campaign for Jeremy and all the other candidates that people are involved in, but let's also think about how we're going to organise, whether it's People's Assembly, Stop the War, the Palestine movement, all the different things. How do we build those movements? How do we strengthen them for the very big battles that are ahead? And I particularly just want to finish by just saying about the, we've just seen the Euro elections, which are slightly, there's some good votes for the left. La France Insoumise in France got good votes in lots of the working class areas around Paris, for example. But essentially, in many, many countries, there's been a move to the right. We have a fascist prime minister in Italy. We have a situation now where Macron has just called an election in France, and the danger of Le Pen and the fascists there doing well is obviously very, very great. So this is what we have to look at in the months and years ahead, that we're looking at a very polarized situation, and we have to build the left, we have to build the socialist left, we have to build the wider left, and we have to build the movements and the unions which can defeat the right and which can actually bring change in this society. Thanks.